We are beginning chapter 32. This is the very end now of the book of Deuteronomy. It consists of really two poems. The first one, Ha'azinu, which is what we're going to look at today, and then Zot HaBracha, which is the last piece of the book of Deuteronomy, and by extension, the Torah itself. We may get through all of it today, or we may have to leave a piece of it until next week. Regardless, we will begin the book of Joshua next week. And I'll have something to say at the end of the class about what you might use as a text as we start to go through the book of Joshua. For now, we're looking at, again, it's chapter 32. We're on page 1185 in the Eitz Chaim Chumash. And Moses begins by addressing heaven and earth. Ha'azinu hashamayim va'adabera, give ear, O heavens, let me speak. Let the earth hear the words that I utter. This is classic biblical poetry, and essentially you have almost every phrase is repeated in some form or intensified as it's repeated, and we're going to see this again and again. We're going to come back, but let me just read down. You'll see it. Give ear, O heavens, let me speak. Let the earth hear the words that I utter. See, words and speak, heaven and earth. May my discourse come down as the rain, my speech as the dew. And then we're going to go even further with this metaphor, like showers on young growth, like droplets on the grass. So all of this is, first we have speech, discourse rather, and then speech, and then we have rain and dew, and now intensifying it, showers and droplets, and in one case we have growth, and in the other case we have grass, right? So again and again we get these parallel phrases, different words to say the same thing. And this was typical of biblical poetry, and it seems poetry among other ancient peoples as well. They had the poets had essentially a list of, and it's all, of course, spoken, it's not written, right? But these groups of similar words, synonyms, are well known. They're used over and over again, both in Hebrew and in other cognate languages. So Moses is, for the moment, addressing heaven and earth. Now, earlier we had this idea that Moses was calling heaven and earth to witness something. And the idea was they will always be there, and therefore they will be witnesses later on. If the people break the covenant, they are witnesses to the covenant, just as the memories of the ancestors are. Here it doesn't seem to be that, but it is sort of a poetic way of saying, this is something that I am speaking to the whole world. Right, it is addressed to the largest possible community, and now with beautiful images, Moses's discourse, his speech, itself is fruitful. It is life restoring. Somehow this speech will give life, continue to bring life, and here, if we look ahead, the idea really is that if the message here is heeded, that it will bring life to the Jewish people in the land of Israel, and they will live there for a long time. So it's a warning, as we're going to see, but it's not a prophecy. In other words, the idea here is this will happen if you don't heed my words. It's up to you whether it happens, and the significance of this speech is that if you listen to it, all of these metaphors for flourishing and you know, it will sustain you. And anyway, then we get a reference. Now we're moving on, right? So the first part of Moses's address is listen, and it'll bring life. And now Moses is going to describe God. And he uses a particular word here, hatsur, right? God is a tsur, right? A tsur, TS, right? Tsur, not sewer. A tsur is a rock, right? Hard, flinty, impermeable, right? Other, in a sense, right? So the idea here is a rock can be a protector. And we're going to see here language about protection, that God is the protector of the people until God ceases to be that protector. We have the word rock has resonance in two different ways, and I think differing ways. One is it's reminiscent of the scene after the golden calf, when Moses pleads that the people be forgiven, and God says, I will forgive them as you asked. And then Moses, seeing that God is open to Moses's requests, say, let me experience you, right? Hareini na kvodecha, let me have a sense of your presence. And here Moses is asking for something very direct, very physical. Moses is one who it is said sees God face to face, but that is kind of metaphorical. Here Moses is asking, in the book of Exodus, Moses is asking for a kind of unmediated, direct, non-metaphorical encounter with God. God's answer is no human being can see me that way and live, but here is a rock. You'll go behind the rock. I will pass before you. You will not see me, but you will see my wake, right? And that's what happens. And Moses hears the attributes of God, right? The attributes that we know well from the high holidays, Adonai, Adonai, El Rahum V'Hanun, and so on, right? So there we have strongly the image of protector. But I have to say, I see in this something else as well, something that's going to be reflected throughout what's going to happen here. And we'll see this at the end of the chapter particularly, and that is that Moses sins at a rock, right? You remember, we'll look at it, the story from Numbers, where God commands Moses to speak to a rock, and rather he hits it. And that scene and Moses's sin is also going to be invoked here in chapter 31. So God is both a rock in the sense of a protector, but also one who metes out justice when people fail to live up to their commitments to him. And Moses is the ultimate example. Even Moses will meet with God's justice. God is called a rock. He is tamim. He is just, perfect. All that he does is perfect, and called rachav mishpat. All of his ways are just, right? He's faithful, never false. Sadiq v'yashar. Sadiq is righteous. Here it's being translated as true, and yashar is upright or direct, right? So God is without flaw. Now, this is very similar. This language is very similar to the language that mourners use. There's a prayer that is said at a burial. And then later on, also, it's called Siduk Hadin. And this is the mourner's response by saying, essentially, this happened to me. I accept that God is just. It's a difficult theological statement to make. In fact, certainly in certain circumstances. But in the midst of that sorrow and that pain, it's a statement of acceptance, right? I don't understand God's ways, essentially. God does what's right and just, but it happened this way through the death of one of my loved ones. And Moses here, too, it's going to be a kind of tziduk hadin for him, because as we come to the end of this chapter, we will be reminded that Moses has a death sentence, that he is going to die. He's going to go up at God's command. He's going to go up to the mountain and he is going to die. And this is, in some ways, his acceptance of God's justice and the justice of God's actions. And now we're going to shift to the third section of this poem. And this is, we've described how God is thoroughly God is faithful, right? And now, unlike God, the Jewish people, God's children, are going to be acting in a way that is unfaithful, the opposite of that. God is yashar. The translation here is upright, but yashar means straight. And we're going to see that the people are crooked, right? Unlike God, who is straight, right? So we're setting this up. Moses says, hear this pronouncement. Now we are told that God is good and reliable and always there, but rather than appreciate that and obey, the people are unworthy and will now do the opposite of what they're intended. And I want to come back again to say that this is not a prophecy. It is a warning, right? So he says, children are unworthy of them. Their baseness has played God false. Do you thus requite the Lord? Is this, in a sense, is this how you repay God for all that God has done for you? The Hebrew, I think, is emphasis is a little different in this phrase. If you look at the Hebrew, this is verse 6, Haladonai tigmulo zot. The ha, notice that the hey is larger, it's printed larger. This hot, like it's an expression of surprise and outright. To God, you thus act, right? Like, how audacious can you be? What chutzpah, right? There's a sense of surprise and shock and outrage here, that God, who has done everything for you, you repay God this way. And then they're referred to as am navel lo chacham, a dull and witless people. And what is that relationship that you have to God? This tzur, this rock, this protector. Halohu avicha? Is God not your parent, your father, who created you? And we see here masculine imagery, it's God as the father. But before we're done with this poem, we're also going to see imagery, very direct imagery, which compares God to a mother, right? It's very parental. And he's just as your parents create you, God has created you. And here, of course, it's not just, there are two senses in which God created the people who are being addressed. One is that God is the creator, right? That God is the one who created all of humanity. But the other is specific to the people of Israel, that God created you as a nation by the relationship that God has with Jacob, and ultimately through Jacob and his sons, you became a people. What'll be striking here, and we're going to have a reference specifically to Jacob in a minute. The language here is the sort of the God of nature. It is not really the God of history. And what I mean by that, and I'm very struck by it here, there's no reference to the Exodus. It's again and again and again, we see reference throughout the book of Deuteronomy, and I would argue through much of the Bible. We owe God because God took us from the house of bondage and took us as as God's people. Right? That is the relationship and that we come to Sinai and we accept a covenant and we are bound by that covenant because of what God did for us, right? Think about the beginning of Aseret HaDibrot, at the beginning of the Ten Commandments, right? I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God, right? That's the essential relationship. We don't see any of that here. I don't know quite what to make of it, but it's really, sometimes things are striking by omission, and this is one of those things. I'm going to open it up in a couple of minutes. When I do, if you have any thoughts about that, I'd really be interested, because I'm not sure why Moses at this moment, it seems to me, deliberately avoids a mention of the Exodus. And we're going to, well, you'll see in a minute, more than that God will so much, you'll see how much God will ignore it. Okay, so remember the days of old, consider the years of ages past, ask your father and he will inform you. So God is your father, but here now we're asking, remember what's happened. Ask your father, your elders, and they will tell you. And then what is it that they're going to tell you? When the Most High gave nations their homes and set the divisions of man, in other words, created peoples. When God created the peoples of the earth, and fixed the boundaries of those people, right? So now we know, and the lands that those people will have, right? So where the Amorites will be, and where the Canaanites will be, and what their land is, and the Edomites and Edom and so on. He did it, and it says in relation to Israel's numbers. It's a very strange statement. So first of all, when did this happen? According to Genesis, it happens right after the story of the Tower of Babel, right? That originally, everybody is one people, one language, and then they get scattered. And when they get scattered, then we have individual peoples speaking different languages in different places. That is well before Israel, the people of Israel. There are 70 nations, and that's the Bible is always talking about 70 nations. Not clear, by the way, whether that's meant literally. Because 7 and 70, the Bible uses language symbolically, right? And 7, it generally connotes wholeness, completeness, harmony, right? So in 7 days, God creates heaven and earth, and then it's complete, right? It's whole, right? So to say 70, it's not clear whether that's literal or not. But in relation to Israel's numbers, does seem to be talking about the people of Israel, because if you think about Israel here as Jacob, right? Because Jacob and Israel are synonymous. Jacob gets the name Israel, his second name, when he wrestles with the angel back in Genesis, right? And how many are there? How many people go into Egypt or in Egypt together with Jacob? You know, it's 70, right? We see that in the Midrash. We see it at the beginning of the Passover Haggadah, right? Our ancestors went down 70, and it's at the beginning of Exodus. And then the point is, from these 70, this enormous nation arises, mighty and numerous, and scares Pharaoh. They'll turn against us, and so on. So it could be that the reference here is to the people of Israel. And there were 70 descendants together with Jacob, could be. Or it seems to be talking about the time when they were divided to begin with. Now, it may be that that original division foreshadowed the coming of the people of Israel, but there is another possibility. And that, if you look in the Septuagint, which is the translation of the Torah into Greek, and also a document which was found in Qumran, in the Dead Scrolls, the text is slightly different. So here it says, if you look at the Hebrew, Lemispar B'nai Yisrael, according to the number of B'nai Yisrael. But in Qumran and in the Septuagint, the word B'nai and Yisra, that part of it, is missing. And it is B'nai El, right? The Elim are these minor deities. We've seen it again and again in the book of Exodus, right? That God has allowed these sort of lesser gods for the other nations. So if you want to read it the way the Septuagint reads it and the Qumran scroll reads it, then there were 70 of these demigods or whatever they are that God has allowed, and each one of them gets a nation, and that nation's God is the one. These are, I read someone who said, it's like a king who has provinces, and he assigns a governor to each of those provinces. So you can read it either way. But the point is, God is in control of all the nations. God gave them the land, right? But unlike everyone else, the Lord's portion is God's people. Jacob is God's own allotment. They may have other gods, they may have other lands, but they don't have, and we've seen this again and again. It is the people of Israel that have this special relationship with God. And I'm going to go just a little bit further, and then I'm going to open up for questions, because this is part of why I was talking before about the lack of the Exodus here. He found, that is, God found him, that is Jacob or Israel, in a desert region, in a empty, howling waste, and God girded him, watched over him, guarded him as the pupil of the eye. So where does the relationship between God and Israel begin? In the desert. That's what this poem seems to be saying, right? God found him there and protected him. I mean, it's stunning, right? The Exodus is gone. Okay, I'll leave that as an open question. I am going to, let me just change the view if I can remember. I don't know why I'm having, oh, it's because of the participants list, I guess. Here it is. Okay, questions, comments up to this point. Hannah.
Yeah, I wonder if I have the right source. It doesn't look it. I have a Tanakh and I'm turned to Joshua, but it doesn't have.
Not in Joshua yet.
Not in Joshua.
We are Still finishing the
Had
book
to
of,
do the
we're
book of,
still finishing Exodus. We're close.
oh.
Okay,
don't
so,
need-
so what you want to do is look at Deuteronomy, and we are in chapter 32. You must have found this extremely confusing. 32.
Yeah.
Page are we on?
That's okay. Any other questions, comments?
What page are we on? So now that I'm not driving anymore, I just didn't want to interrupt you before.
No, that's fine. We're on page 1187.
Well, thank you.
1187. Good. And yeah, Saul.
I just wanted to say that I took a class many years ago into Elim. And when one part of the sentence complements the other, if anybody wants to look at Ashrei Yoshvei Beitecha,
Yes, exactly.
the end complements the beginning.
Right, right. It's right. This is classical biblical poetry, and that's what Psalms are as well, right? They're poems, they're biblical poems. So yes, Ashrei works very much the same way. Each part of the verse, or sometimes it's divided into two verses, but they're kind of repetitive, but intensifying also, or moving from the general to the specific, which illuminates the general. Good. Sandy?
Oh, first, Hannah, I sent you a chat. You didn't see that with the page number?
Yeah, I saw that, but that didn't make sense.
Oh,
in the
anyway,
book.
all right. I have a
I thought we
comment.
needed the book of Joshua, so I.
Oh, sorry, I didn't say that. Okay.
Yeah,
Rabbi,
I'm doing it now.
Have it soon. Sandy.
I have a comment and a question. So the beginning of chapter 32 reminded me of the Shema. Is that fair?
Yeah.
About
well,
rain, and
right.
then if you follow what I say, then the
Yes,
good things will
yes.
happen.
Yes, right. And
Yeah.
it's here. It's not Shema Yisrael. It's Tishma Haaretz, right? And so yes, and again we have, and you're going to see that as we come towards the end. Also, let me jump ahead to very end of the chapter, and you're going to see, if you want to look at it, it's like verse 46, and it says, "Take these words to your heart, which I have charged you today, and enjoin them on your children, that they may," right? So it's the same. This is Deuteronomy language. Take things to heart, teach your children, hear, hearken, absolutely. And you said you had a question also.
Right. So verse 5, where it says, is corruption his? No, his children's is the blemish, a generation crooked and perverse.
Mhm.
I think you said that that's a warning. Did you something like? Isn't that? Is that not referring to what already happened in the desert?
Yes, a lot of this sounds like what had happened in the desert, but in order to think that this is really about, it's a kind of reference to a kind of behavior that the people did in the desert, and we're going to see more of it. But God, if you were to say that, then you would say God is punishing them for that, right? And the problem with that analysis, again, I'm going to the end, right? Because teach your children, it's not a trifling thing, it is your life. Through it, you will long endure on the land that you are to possess, right? So that sounds like you did bad things and you're going to be punished, then they're not even going to get there, right? Or they're going to get there and immediately be punished. It seems to be from what Moses is saying is, look, you've done bad things in the past. And remember, they were punished for those things in the wilderness. Here, Moses is saying, talk to your fathers. You know about these things, right? You know about that punishment. Now, be clear If you sin in the future, it's a warning, right? It's in prophetic language. It is, this will happen, but understood there is, if you do not follow what I've just taught you in the book of Deuteronomy, that's what will happen.
I see. Thank you.
Okay? Sure. Look, it doesn't look like that, but I think from its context, it's really the only plausible reading, at least to me. Anything else? Okay, let us then go up here for a moment. Okay, so I'm going back to verse 10, 1187. God found him in a desert region, in an empty, howling waste, right? He engirded him. These are words of protection, literally surrounded him. There's almost a sense, and I'm emphasizing this because of what we're going to see in a minute. It's almost like a baby that is swaddled, right? Engulfed him, and then surrounds him, watches over him, guards him as the pupil of his eye, right? Something that I think became an expression. It really is a biblical expression, right? How does one guard the pupil of one's eye? Automatically. You try, put a finger in, the lash comes down, right? There is this sense in which there is real protection for the pupil of the eye. And now God is compared to an eagle with its nestlings. And that imagery you see back in the book of Exodus around Sinai. Before the revelation at Sinai, I bore you on eagle's wings, so I brought you out of Egypt. What is there about an eagle? The way it treats its nestlings, right? Eagle is the most powerful of all birds, but when it comes to its young, it's very, it protects them. He glides down to his young. God spread God's wings and take him and bear. So did God spread God's wings and take him, meaning Jacob, and bearing him along on his pinions, right? The Lord alone did guide him. No alien God was at his side. And here we're setting up we're really going to talk about idolatry. And idolatry then as a rejection of God's love and care. And so we're setting that up here by saying, it was only God who was there. No one else treated you this way. No alien God. And therefore, when you go astray after them, you are turning your back. This is a violation of the parental bond, right? This is not honoring your father and your mother who gave you life, right? This is the opposite. This is not a violation in the language here of a covenantal bond. That's Sinai. That's the Exodus in a sense. This is much more basic. It's much more generic. Generic in the sense of true to all human beings. And then here, this is how God, we're still talking about God and God's love for Jacob, for Israel, who found him, who protected him. He set him atop the highlands to feast on the yield of the earth, in the most lush places where they're the best grasses. And then he fed him honey from the rock, right? Sur Dvash Mitzela, right? And Shemen and oil from flinty rock. So this idea of honey from the rock, and the language here, I do want to emphasize the Hebrew here. The language is Vayanikehu, right? He nursed him, right? The language here is very maternal. God, he doesn't feed him. He nurses him. And remember that the manna in the wilderness, one of the descriptions of it is that it tastes like honey. So that is, the metaphor is nursing, and the substance is, and then we're going to get to milk, right? Curd of kine and milk of flock, right? So eaten down to the base of the, wait, I'm skipping a page, sorry. With the best of the lambs and the rams of Bashan, right, very fertile pasture, he-goats with the very finest wheat and foaming grape blood that was your drink, right? You get a sense of the blood of the grape is the wine. So God will take care of you in all these ways, but, and here's what you shouldn't do, Yeshurun grew fat and kicked, grew fat and gross and coarse. You forsook the God. He forsook the God that made him, spurned the rock of his support. Yeshurun is very similar to Yisrael. Yeshurun, Yisrael, and seems to be some sort of synonym for it. I don't see it elsewhere, but it clearly is a reference to the people of Israel. It also is based around the idea of Yashar. We've seen that root. Again, God is Yashar, God is upright, right? This is those who were and are now going down a crooked path. And he gave you, or will give you, all of this plenty, and you will grow fat and gross and coarse and forsake God. And again, the rock of his support. It's all in the past, they incensed him with alien things, vexed him with abominations, right? These seem to be idols. They sacrifice to demons. And in Hebrew, the word is shedim. Shedim, by the way, this is, you see this in the word shedim in the Talmud all the time, malevolent spirits. There are various things you can do in the Talmud. This is kind of Jewish folk wisdom, right? What do you do to protect yourself? There are a lot of there's a whole section of the tractate, largely about Passover, Psachim, which also deals with witches and shedim and how you protect yourself from them. There are formulas that you can invoke and all sorts of other things. The custom of tying a red string around, sometimes for a baby, around a crib, all of this is really to protect you from shedim. These malevolent forces, not powerful, not like God. You're sacrificing to them, to literally no gods, those who are not gods, and gods that you have no experience with, new gods who have come but lately, and who spurn not your father's fear, and you neglected the rock that begot you. And here the language again is feminine, and it is giving birth, that God gave birth to the people of Israel, forgot the God who brought you forth. It says brought forth, but the language here is not the language of Yitziah, of coming out, which would be Egypt, right? The language is of giving birth. In fact, it's a language of birth pangs that are experienced. So God is good, God is right, God is just. You, on the other hand, and gave you everything. And you, on the other hand, have been rebellious, gone against other gods, ignored your parent who nursed you, who brought you into this world. And now, consequences. God saw and was vexed, spurned his sons and his daughters. It's interesting that generally in Hebrew, son would be enough. But here it's really everyone. And it may also be because idolatry and sort of particularly household idols, some of them at least are associated with women. Very peculiar story of Jacob when he flees from Laban and is going back to his home, to the land of Israel. Rachel takes her father's trophim, her father's idols, with her, hides them, sits on them, says she's having her period, which has a bad end for her, it seems. And one wonders, why does she take them? All of that. But that aside, there is a kind of connection with women and idolatry as much as with men. And so what does God do? God's reaction is intense. God, again, we saw this in the last section. Astira fanai mehem. I will hide my countenance. I'll turn my face from them. And let's see how that works out. See how they fare in the end. They are a treacherous breed, children with no loyalty. They incensed me with no gods, vexed me with their futilities. And the word here in Hebrew is havlehem, their hevel, their nothingness. The opening, it really means sort of mere breath, right? Vapor. So I'll incense them with a no folk, vex them with a nation of fools. So what am I going to do to them? I'm going to take a paltry nothing nation, a bunch of fools, and I'm going to use them as my weapon against this faithless people. For a fire has burned in my wrath and burned to the bottom of Sheol, right? God's fire is overwhelming. It goes right into the netherworld, and it consumes the earth and its increase, eaten down to the base of the hills. I will sweep misfortunes on them, use my arrows on them, right? Very metaphorical language. God now is a warrior shooting through this no people that God is using as God's instrument, shooting arrows of famine and plague, deadly pestilence, fanged beasts. There is slightly a reference here, maybe to the plagues in Egypt, but it's not complete at all. I'll let loose on them venomous snakes in the dust. The sword shall deal death without, as shall the terror within, to youth and maiden alike, the suckling as well as the age. I might have reduced them to naught, made their memory cease among men, right? I could have done that, but fear of the taunts of the foe, their enemies who might misjudge and say, our own hand has prevailed. None of this was wrought by the Lord, right? In other words, I would wipe them out, except that the instrument of my wrath will think that they did it. They won't understand that they were being used by. So I can't let the people of Israel be wiped out completely, because the others will think that it was them who did it. Were they wise? We would think on this, gain insight into the future. They would realize, how could one have routed 1,000 or two put 10,000 into flight? Unless their rock, the one who protects them, the enemy, in other words, the one who protects Israel, had sold them. In other words, so the there here is the people of Israel. It's not the enemy, right? If the enemy were wise and thought upon it and gained insight, they would ask, how could one have routed 1,000, right? Unless their rock, Their God had saved them. The Lord had given them up. For their rock is not like our rock in our enemy's own estimation. All right, so God is ultimately now going to wreak vengeance on the enemies who God allowed, I want to use the word allowed very deliberately, who God allowed to protect the people of Israel. The image here is not that God sent these enemies. God rather removes God's face and looks the other way and allows this to happen. And because the enemy essentially has free choice, the enemy, even though it is an instrument of God's will, ordinarily God would be protecting Israel and they would be powerless. Now God's looked the other way, they come through, and now a vine for them is from Sodom, that is the enemy. From the vineyards of Gomorrah, they are great. The grapes for them are poison, a bitter growth in their clusters. Their wine is the venom of asps, the pitiless poison of vipers. Lo, I have put it all away, sealed up my storehouses, to be my vengeance and recompense. At that time their foot falters, yea, their day of disaster is near, and their destiny rushes upon them. For the Lord will vindicate his people, that is the people of Israel, and take refuge, take revenge for his servants when he sees that their might is gone and neither bond nor free is left. He will say, where is their gods, the rock in whom they sought refuge, who ate the fat of their offering and drank their libation wine? Let them rise up to your help and let them be a shield on you. That is to say, they'll see and they'll say, where is your God? Why isn't your God protecting you? See then that I am he, there is no God beside me. I deal with death and give life. I wound and I heal. None can deliver from my hand. I raise my hand to heaven and I say. So here God is now swearing, right? I raise my hand. Now, who is God swearing to? God is essentially swearing to God's self, right? And he says, Chai anochi liolam, as I live forever, when I wet my flashing blade, and my hand lays hold on judgment, vengeance will I wreak on my foes, will I deal with those who reject me. I will make my hours drunk with blood, my sword devours fresh flesh, blood of the slain and the captives from the long-haired enemy chiefs. O nations, acclaim God's people. God will avenge the blood of his servants, wreak vengeance on his foes, and cleanse the land, it says, of his people. It doesn't mean cleanse the land of people, that is, get rid of the people, but his people's land, God will cleanse, right? And then we get a little bit of a narrative, which I'm actually going to leave till next time. This is as Moses now concludes the plan. And God is going to speak to Moses and tell him that it is now his time to die. Moses will speak some final words, blessings for the tribes, and then God will die. So we're going to see that next time. And I firmly believe that we will finish the book, finish the Torah next time, and same session, we will begin the book of Joshua. So a word about that before we wind up. So in terms of text, I think I mentioned to you, if you have a Hebrew and English text, that is ideal. If you want to just use any English translation, I mentioned Robert Alter's. You can get a paperback. I looked on Amazon. You can get a paperback copy of Joshua and Judges. And I think that would be useful. The other thing you can do, if you don't want to spend any money and you don't have a Bible, there's this, and I'll put this in the email I send out. There is a wonderful website called Sefaria, right? Sefaria, that has filled with Jewish texts. It's got the Bible, it's got the Talmud, it's got the Midrash, it's got Maimonides, it's got everything. And a good part of that is in English translation. And you can set it up so that you can view the English text next to the Hebrew text or below the Hebrew text. Or if you don't want the Hebrew text, you can just see the English text. Translation, not as good as Alter, but again, it's free and it's accessible. So if you're going to do that, Francesca, give me half a second. If you're going to do that, what I suggest you do is to download the Sefaria app to your phone. Have your phone where you'll be able to follow the text, right? Or I guess you could open two windows. That might be a way to do it also, however you want to do it. But you could access the book of Joshua through Sefaria if you want. So 3 different ways. One, Hebrew English Tanakh, right? Number 2, purchasing you could also purchase, I think it's still available, the Sansino has individual volumes of the Torah, of the Tanakh rather, and there's, if you went on Amazon, you might be able to find a Sansino Joshua, and that does have some traditional commentary and notes on it. So that's useful in that way. Robert Alton's translation, or no translation, no text at all that you have to get except to use Sefaria. Francesca.
That's what Rabbi Tobin does with our Monday Talmud class. He puts Sefaria like as a split screen. So you see him on part of the screen and the Sefaria on the other. And would that be possible to do?
I have to look at it, maybe.
I bet he could tell you how to do it since he does it every week.
Yeah, maybe. I'll see what I can do.
Okay.
But thank you for pointing that out. Anybody else? Anything else? So, yeah. Go
I
ahead.
actually have a question. So this sounds like the way the wrath of God coming through for us lousy no-goodniks. It sort of reminds me with what he did with Noah with the flood about getting rid of everybody.
Yes.
That's what I keep thinking about.
Yeah. So, I mean, God is here. No, he's not. He's not a user-friendly God. He's not a happy, clappy God. Right? This is sometimes you hear the God of the Old Testament. The Christian way of referring to the Torah, right? The God or the Tanakh, the God of the Old Testament is a God of vengeance, and the God of the New Testament is a God of love. I actually think that's wildly wrong. God clearly loves the people. In fact, we have the image here of God as a nursing mother, right? But God is a God of deep emotions. God is a God who feels betrayal. Here in the flood, what you see, though, is the undoing of creation. Right? The flood is really, when God creates the world, God separates the waters, right? The upper waters and the lower waters, creates a barrier to keep the upper waters or the sky, but you're seeing water through a barrier. That's what you see when you see the sky, according to Genesis, right? God simply opens the gates of the sky, the water comes pouring down, and creation is undone. Not totally, because God's going to stop it. But God, in a sense, what you see there is God saying, my wife, is a potter. So she'll make something, And if it's just not what she wants, she basically smushes the clay all up, right? And then starts again to make something else, right? So that's the image, right? God created the world, done with it, right? That is really not this. There it's not, here it's betrayal. There it's, this didn't work out the way I planned in Genesis. I think that's a little bit different.
Okay, thank you.
But I understand why you would see a parallel. Anything else, Saul?
Yeah, the phrase Kaneshia Yakino Al Gazolav Yerachef. That is in the traditional Sidurim, included in the prayer before you put on the talit. It's a metaphor. The talit protects us as well as the equal protecting his young.
Idea of protection, essentially. That the talit itself is protection. There are a number of beautiful images there. There's an image also of the talit as a kind of garment of light. I think that whole section of the Siddur is beautiful, really beautiful. Sandy.
Also, getting back to sort of what Francesca said, after the Israelites left Egypt, I mean, after they crossed the Red Sea, there was an incident, I think soon after maybe, where God wanted to wipe out the people, and Moses said, don't do that. How's it going to look to the world, to the Egyptians? He took us out just to die in the desert.
Yes, it's slightly different, but I think it's very similar. There, Moses is saying, in both cases, God cares about God's reputation, right? Here, it's also there. It is in both cases, it's kind of a lack of power, right? That others will ascribe a lack of power to God. There, it's not so much, and therefore will follow other gods, or it will strengthen people's esteem for other gods. There, it's rather, they'll say that God is, impotent, or right. So it's a little bit different. But yeah, this is God's reputation. What is the purpose of the Exodus? And there are several, right? One is to free the people of Israel from Egypt, but another is to kind of demonstrate God's enormous power in the world, why that God is the true God. And Moses is saying, hey, if that's why you did this, it's not going to work. You're gonna blow it, right? If that's what you want. So one of the and Moses uses a series of arguments to convince God not to wipe out the people. And remember, in one case, God says, I'll get rid of them. You'll be the new Abraham. I'll start a whole new nation from you, right? And Moses is, I think that one of the things that makes Moses, sort of the greatest of prophets is that he has this dual role, that he is not only God's messenger delivering what God wants, but he is also the people's fierce advocate, who is able, because of his unique relationship with God, is able to assuage God's anger, and make very lawyerly sorts of arguments in order to convince God that the course that God has chosen to follow is not a wise one. You see a little bit of that with Abraham, right? When Abraham says at Sodom and Gomorrah, should not the judge of the whole earth do justly? There, first of all, he does, attempt to argue for people in the face of a divine decree. There, though, it seems to be about not so much God's reputation with Abraham, as if to say, this is beneath you. This is not who you are, right? That it's an argument about God's character. You're losing sight of who you really are. It's a different kind of an argument than your reputation. But that is what is being, what God, there it's Moses is talking about. here it's God is saying, even though they deserve it, I'm not going to wipe them out completely, lest the instrument of my will get the wrong idea. And more than that, I unleash them, but they would have done it because they could, and therefore they will be punished as well. Okay,
Thank you.
next week, we're going to finish the Torah. And we're going to, God willing, start the book of Joshua. Now, the other thing is, you have a little time if you want in terms of getting the book, because the very beginning of the book of Joshua is the Haftorah at the very end of the Torah, right? Right after, so it's the Haftorah for Simchat Torah, because on Simchat Torah we read the end of the Torah, and then the Haftorah is the continuation of that story. So that does buy you a little time. I'll be sending out, as I usually do, a notice with a link, but I will include in it different ways that you'll be able to follow. Sorry, I look forward to seeing you then. Have a great week, everybody.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Bye now.
Well,
Thank you.